Consider the single seed a farmer drops into the soil. It looks like the most natural, ancient thing in the world, the very opposite of high technology. And yet, across a huge share of the world's most important crops, that seed is now a patented invention engineered in a laboratory owned by a corporation and sold under strict legal terms that can forbid the farmer from doing the one thing farmers have done for 10,000 years, saving seed to plant again next season. This is a series about the companies that run the world, and today it is the one that reached furthest upstream of all, to the genetics of food itself. The company at the center of this story carries two names because it is really two histories fused together. There is Bayer, the old and respected German chemicals and pharmaceuticals house. And there is Monsanto, an American agricultural giant that became, for many people, the single most controversial company in the entire food system. In 2018, Bayer bought Monsanto, absorbed its business, and even retired the Monsanto name. But it also inherited, in one stroke, the most divisive legacy in modern agriculture. To understand why, you have to go back to what Monsanto became. It started as an ordinary chemicals company, but in the late 20th century, it made an audacious bet on biotechnology. It would engineer the genes of crops directly, creating seeds with new traits written into their very DNA. Corn, soybeans, cotton, and more, redesigned at the molecular level. It was a genuine scientific leap, and it changed the business of farming across much of the planet. Those engineered traits were not magic, they were specific and practical. Some crops were designed to resist insects, producing their own natural pesticide so the plant defended itself. Others were engineered to survive drought or to tolerate a particular weed killer. Each trait solved a real problem in the field, and each one, crucially, could be written into the seed, patented, and sold. The masterstroke, commercially, was to pair the seed with a chemical. Monsanto sold a hugely popular weed killer, whose active ingredient is called glyphosate, under the brand Roundup. Then it engineered crops to be immune to it. Now a farmer could spray the whole field, killing every weed, while the crop stood untouched. Buy the seed, buy the spray, and buy them together, season after season. It was one of the most powerful business loops modern agriculture had ever seen. That loop is the heart of the moat. Because these seeds are patented inventions, the farmer typically cannot legally save and replant them. Each season, the seed must be bought anew. Tie that to the matching chemical, and you have a system that, at its peak, turned a large fraction of the world's farmers into recurring customers, locked into a technological package they could not easily leave. Ownership of the actual genetics of major crops is a form of power agriculture had simply never seen before. And that power was enforced, quite literally, in court. Monsanto became infamous for pursuing farmers it accused of saving or replanting its patented seed without paying again. To the company, it was simply defending an invention it had spent fortunes to create. To its many critics, the image was unforgettable and disturbing. A giant corporation taking individual farmers to court over the seeds in their own fields. Few things did more to cement Monsanto's reputation as a villain. The scale of the bet that fused these companies together is captured in one number. Bayer paid on the order of $60 billion to acquire Monsanto, one of the largest deals its industry had ever attempted. It was a colossal wager that the future of feeding the world lay in owning the seeds and the chemistry beneath them. And almost immediately, that wager ran into a storm that would erase enormous value and haunt the company for years. That storm was glyphosate itself. Around the world, tens of thousands of people filed lawsuits claiming the weed killer had caused their cancer. The science remains genuinely and bitterly contested, with major regulators disagreeing with one another about the risk. But in courtroom after courtroom, juries sided with the plaintiffs, and Bayer found itself facing a legal liability so vast it swallowed much of what it had paid for Monsanto in the first place. It became one of the great cautionary tales of modern corporate history. Beneath the lawsuits sits an even older and deeper argument, the one over genetically modified crops themselves. To critics, engineering the genes of the food supply and concentrating ownership of it in a few corporate hands is a profound risk we barely understand. To defenders, the very same technology has raised yields, reduced some kinds of pesticide use, and helped feed a growing planet. It is one of those debates where both sides hold a real and serious piece of the truth. Bayer, of course, does not stand alone in this field. The business of agricultural inputs, the seeds and the chemicals that farming runs on, has consolidated into a tiny handful of titans. Alongside Bayer stand Corteva, spun out of the old American chemical giants, and Syngenta, once Swiss and now owned by a Chinese state enterprise, together with the German chemicals maker BASF. Between them, this small club supplies an enormous share of the commercial seeds and crop chemicals of the entire world. That concentration is what makes this a story about power, and not just science. When four companies dominate the seeds and the sprays that feed billions of people, the decisions they make about prices, about research, about which crops and which traits even get developed, ripple out to farmers and eaters everywhere. A grower in almost any country may find that the fundamental inputs of their livelihood come from one of just a few distant corporations. So the question this series always asks arrives here in an unusually literal form of what would actually break if such a company disappeared, in the short term a great deal. Modern high-yield agriculture, across enormous regions, now depends on this engineered seed and chemical system. The knowledge, the seed lines, and the supply chains behind it cannot be conjured up overnight. Whatever one thinks of how we got here, a vast amount of the world's food production is now genuinely entangled with it. But that dependence is exactly what makes people uneasy. It is one thing for a company to own a brand, or a factory, or even a network. It is another for a few of them to own the patented genetics of the crops that human civilization eats. That touches something that feels as though it should belong to everyone, or to no one. The living foundation of the food supply, now sitting substantially inside corporate patent portfolios. And so, we reach the uncomfortable question, in perhaps its most fundamental form in this whole series. Who should own the building blocks of the life that feeds us? It is one thing to license software or a movie season by season, and quite another to license the genetic foundations of the world's major crops from a small number of enormous firms. These are not distant abstractions. They shape what farmers can grow, what it costs, and who ultimately controls the harvest. To be fair, and it genuinely must be said, the science at the core of this is not villainy. It is a real achievement. Feeding 8 billion people is one of the hardest problems our species has ever faced, and higher yielding, more resilient crops are part of how we have, so far, managed to do it. The researchers who engineer a plant to survive a drought or to resist a devastating pest are working on something that matters enormously for human welfare. The discomfort, then, is not really about the science. It is about the ownership. It is about the fact that a technology which could be seen as a shared inheritance of humanity has instead become, in large part, the private and patented property of a few global corporations. The genius and the unease live side by side in the very same seed. And that is the deepest lesson of this particular giant. Reach far enough upstream, past the shops and the brands and the traders, past the fields themselves, and you arrive at last at the seed, and at the DNA folded inside it. Bayer, through Monsanto, reached that far, further upstream than almost anyone, to the genetic source of the food that keeps us all alive. And it discovered that owning the very origin of the harvest is at once an extraordinary business and one of the most contested forms of power on earth.